The remains of 215 children, some as young as 3 years old, have been found buried on the site of what was once Canada's largest Indigenous residential school, one of the institutions that held children taken from families across the nation. Chief Rojan Casimir of the Tk'emlúps Secwépemc First Nation said in a news release that the remains were confirmed last weekend with the help of ground-penetrating radar. More bodies may be found because there are more areas to search on the school grounds, Casimir said Friday. In an earlier release, she called the discovery an unthinkable loss that was spoken about but never documented at the Kamloops Indian Residential School. From the 19th century until the 1970s, more than 150,000 First Nations children were required to attend state-funded Christian schools as part of a program to assimilate them into Canadian society. They were forced to convert to Christianity and not allowed to speak their native languages. Many were beaten and verbally abused, and up to 6,000 are said to have died. The Canadian government apologized in Parliament in 2008 and admitted that physical and sexual abuse in the schools was rampant. Many students recall being beaten for speaking their native languages. They also lost touch with their parents and customs. Indigenous leaders have cited that legacy of abuse and isolation as the root cause of epidemic rates of alcoholism and drug addiction on reservations. A report more than 5 years ago by a Truth and Reconciliation Commission said at least 3,200 children had died amid abuse and neglect, and it said it had reports of at least 51 deaths at the Kamloops school alone between 1915 and 1963. This really resurfaces the issue of residential schools and the wounds from this legacy of genocide towards Indigenous people, Terry Tigay, Assembly of First Nations Regional Chief for British Columbia, said Friday. The remains were detected and not exhumed. Lisa Lapointe, Chief Coroner in British Columbia, said it was advised by the Tk'emlúps Secwépemc on Thursday about the discovery of a burial site located adjacent to the former Kamloops Indian Residential School. We are early in the process of gathering information and will continue to work collaboratively with the Tk'emlúps Secwépemc and others as this sensitive work progresses, Lapointe said. We recognize the tragic, heartbreaking devastation that the Canadian residential school system has inflicted upon so many, and our thoughts are with all of those who are in mourning today. The band is still working with a radar specialist to complete a survey of the ground. They anticipate having a full report ready by mid-June, one Casimir said. Will be shared publicly, but not until it has been disclosed to its membership and other local First Nations chiefs. She said the band will also be looking into what it can do to repatriate the remains and honor the children and the families impacted. British Columbia Premier John Horgan said he was horrified and heartbroken to learn of the discovery, calling it a tragedy of unimaginable proportions that highlights the violence and consequences of the residential school system. The Kamloops school operated between 1890 and 1969, when the federal government took over operations from the Catholic Church and operated it as a day school until it closed in 1978. Casimir said it's believed the deaths are undocumented, although a local museum archivist is working with the Royal British Columbia Museum to see if any records of the deaths can be found. Given the size of the school, with up to 500 students registered and attending at any one time, we understand that this confirmed loss affects First Nations communities across British Columbia and beyond, Casimir said in the initial release issued late Thursday. The leadership of the Tk'emlúps community acknowledges their responsibility to caretake for these lost children, Casimir said. Access to the latest technology allows for a true accounting of the missing children and will hopefully bring some peace and closure to those lives lost, she said in the release. Casimir said band officials are informing community members and surrounding communities that had children who attended the school. The First Nations Health Authority called the discovery of the remains extremely painful and said in a website posting that it will have a significant impact on the Tk'emlúps community and in the communities served by this residential school. The authority's CEO, Richard Jock, said the discovery illustrates the damaging and lasting impacts that the residential school system continues to have on First Nations people, their families and communities. Nicole Skibis, a law professor at Thompson Rivers University, said each of her first-year law students at the Kamloops University spends at least one day at the former residential school speaking with survivors about conditions they had endured. She said she did not hear survivors talk about an unmarked grave area, but they all talk about the kids who didn't make it.